You're listening to Shoe In, covering the ins and outs of all things footwear, from sneakers to heels, loafers to slippers, and every type of shoe in between. Brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear.
Hello, Shoe and Show listeners. Welcome back to another edition of the world's greatest footwear business podcast. It might be the only footwear business podcast, Thomas, but nevertheless, we've been doing this for a long time, and we thoroughly enjoy having conversations and meeting with people who have been in the industry, who are innovators, who are entrepreneurs. And this episode is no different. Not only that, but this person is one of your neighbors, Thomas. Go figure. And this is the journey that we've started with our guest today. Started with you, and you're being a neighbor of him. So why don't you introduce us to who's on the show, and let's get to it.
Yeah, we're really excited to bring in Mike Gugat from Jbrds, which is a children's footwear company. We are literally neighbors, friends, and he's in the industry. He's been in the industry for a long time, worked at some great companies out in Portland. Now he's got his own business. So, Mike, we're so glad to have you on the show today.
Well, it's an honor to be with you guys. And I think living in Washington is one of those places, as you both know better than I do, that oftentimes it's the question, who do you work for? What do you do? And Thomas and I actually connected on Southern Alabama, of all places, and just an affection for, all things that exist down there. And it was almost a full year before somebody said, "Hey, Mike, how are the shoes coming along?" And Thomas stopped me and said, "Wait, what do you do?" And we were able to put two and two together. So the thing I value most about our friendship is it's authentic. It didn't start in a transactional place. So.
That's hilarious. I also have an affinity for Southern Alabama, or as my mother calls it, LA, Lower Alabama. So that's hilarious. But anyway, Mike, as Thomas mentioned, you've been in the industry. DC is not like a hotbed of footwear activity other than the FDRA and Jbrds, and that pretty much ends it right there. How did you get to the city, and kind of walk through your shoe story? What's your background?
Yeah, well, it's interesting in that my mother actually grew up here and finished high school here, as my grandfather was a retired Rear Admiral, but was at the Pentagon. And so I grew up with stories of DC. He had been born in Annapolis, multi-generations at the Naval Academy. And so there was family in the area. But as background, I grew up in Santa Cruz, California, of all places. I loved sneakers. I grew up, similar to you, Matt, basketball was the passion. And I certainly wasn't blessed with the talent, but didn't stop me from trying. And I ended up going to college in Texas. I went to Southern Methodist University in Dallas. Really upset my Catholic father by choosing a Protestant school, and especially a school that had cheated in football. And anyway, the long story of it is I got there. I had delusions of playing basketball. And before even trying out, the coaches were like, "Hey, look, it's not even worth your time." And so I got talked into playing rugby. And rugby was one of those sports that never stops. So you really do have to train. And running had always been punishment for me in other sports. And now I was having to embrace it as training for this other sport, and fell in love with rugby. But the first thing I had to do was go buy a pair of running shoes. And I went down to a local retailer called Luke's Locker in Dallas, Texas, which was owned by a lawyer who really started the running boom in Texas, a guy named Don Lucas. And funny enough, back in the day when Phil Knight was selling shoes out of the trunk of his car, what became Asics, Don Lucas had been doing the same thing. So Don was the first distributor of Blue Ribbon Sports in the state of Texas. And so there was a lot of history there. But I cut my teeth selling running shoes and meeting lots of reps in the industry, a lot of folks that would go on to hold, amazing roles in companies that we all know. And it was sort of, I was taking finance and accounting classes, but I was really learning the hands-on, practice in managing inventory and working the sales floor. And so upon graduating, I have all these wonderful stories of like near misses in my career. But upon graduating, the Dallas Mavericks were owned by Ross Perot Jr. at the time. And so this is 99, which, if you recall, was the strike shortened season. And the front office was made up by a bunch of former Nike folks. And they were looking to hire entry-level marketing folks to hit the ground. And obviously the Mavericks were not very good at that time. It was Dirk Nowitzki's rookie season. So I was one of those that got hired to, take guys to elementary schools and do papa shots in the outside of Rangers games or anything we could to encourage people to come to the games. And then the strike happened. So as much as I thought my life was going to be spent in the NBA, I had student loans coming due. And there was a Japanese sporting goods company, Mizuno, that was starting a running division, and they hired half a dozen of us that were green and right out of school to divide up the country and be sales, marketing, and promotions guys. And I ended up choosing the Mid-Atlantic. That I was offered a couple of different territories, and only because this is where my mother had grown up, and I'd always wanted to live in DC. So that's how I got here.
So let's fast forward to Jbrds. All right. So now, I know it's a very unique company when it comes to children's footwear. So can you kind of tell us about that? What makes it so unique? What was the vision behind it? How's everything going with Jbrds now?
I appreciate that. So, just again, to kind of after almost 25 years of being in that corporate space, I had always had an entrepreneurial spirit. And oftentimes the entrepreneurial spirit gets punished in the corporate space. You really are a caretaker. You're there. Somebody else has created something, and you're there to make it better, or leave it better than you found it. And but with that spirit, I had decided to take that leap into entrepreneurship. And one of the first phone calls I got was from a retailer up in Baltimore, David Hirschfeld, who had been in my corner my entire career, owns Halliburton Sports, which at one time was one of the biggest mail order retailers in tennis and running, and is now a thriving e-commerce business in tennis and running. And he knew I was consulting and looking to start something. And he says, look, I've got this friend, Dr. Jay LeBeau, longtime foot and ankle surgeon for the Baltimore Orioles. He has an idea for kids' shoes. He's really identified an insight that a lot of the shoes are just either takedowns of adult shoes, or they're essentially just foot coverings. And so I met with him in David Hirschfeld's showroom and listened to his idea. But I had just read the book, The Blue Ocean Strategy. And I knew that if we were going to try to make shoes like everyone else, we were going to have a real big challenge. And so I held up a pair of Pilates socks and a pair of Boost shoes I had been intimately involved in helping launch. And I said, if those two things, could have a baby, then, I'd be interested in helping him figure this out. And so this was just before the pandemic started. And we managed to find, we looked at it from a standpoint of when you're starting something with limited resources, how do you tap into your relationships to execute these things? And so we looked at from concept to delivered good, who are those that we knew? So our designer is a guy named Greg Newman, who's a freelance performance footwear designer, worked at Mizuno, Under Armour, won multiple Editor's Choice Awards in Runner's World. He helped us design. He introduced us to Jones and Vining. Jones and Vining validated the insight when they made our last that they'd never made one like this. That led us to Kevin Huckle. Kevin Huckle had owned and operated Kodiak boots, sold Kodiak boots to Dickies, and ultimately exited again when it went to VF Corporation. He became our sourcing and manufacturing partner. And then with David Hirschfeld having 45,000 square feet of distribution space, instead of us going to a 3PL and paying through the nose to do the fulfillment, we were able to sort of incubate Jbrds within his facility. So customer service, fulfillment, all those things. So to answer your question, we launched last summer. We've done, a little over $250,000 in sales. We've sold several thousand units to get there. We just closed a seed round, but we're now actually transitioning into doing a regulated CF. So we've raised almost $750,000 from 5 individual investors. So we feel like there's some momentum there, but like all startups, we're kind of in that space of, I feel like I'm in a perpetual episode of Shark Tank where I talk to a lot of people that could easily write this check, but they all have a thesis that, you got to have this amount of revenue or that, so we're going to get there. And somebody once told me that, being an entrepreneur, don't call it a venture because ventures can fail. Call it an adventure, and you'll attract relationships and partnerships. And I should say that's why, Thomas, getting to know you, and then with one of our investors having been the former president of Bostonian, he was like, we've got to be a member of the FDRA. So we're glad to be a member.
Yeah, we're so happy to have you, Mike. What's interesting, as you were talking about your journey, it just keeps reverberating. I say this ad nauseum to our members, but footwear, and to those listeners who aren't in the industry, footwear is a familial industry. It is based on relationships. It may seem cliche when you talk about industries, but the cliche is actually true for us. And so you just named so many different people along the way of your journey that have been in and out of these companies, for which the companies you've been in and out of. And we find the same thing, that people have made stops in Beaverton for obvious reasons. People have made stops at maybe in Plano, JCPenney, or back in the day at Payless at the time, or Baltimore Under Armour. People have made these stops along their footwear careers, and they keep kind of reverberating and bouncing back and forth in the footwear ecosystem, if you will. And so talk about how important your background has been and how this is more relational. The Shark Tank thing is interesting because we watch Shark Tank at our home with our girls, and we're always kind of commenting about different pitches and what goes well and what doesn't go well and some of the reactions of the Sharks themselves. But at the end of the day, whether the investment is important, but the relationships are far more important to be successful in this industry.
Absolutely. I had a boss once, and going back to that sort of, corporate experience where you have, builders, caretakers, and then there are also undertakers. But I had a boss who was very transactional, who once said that, relationships don't matter. And it really, it stuck with me that they absolutely do. They're everything. And I think in this journey, a lot of people have been surprised in how we've been able to bootstrap things that others would have paid millions of dollars. And there's plenty of stories of other brands and what was required for them to get through this. And, I was able to, I met this person at the running event 10 years ago, and they know somebody else in sourcing are now having the relationship with the FDRA. Thomas basically helped us with our logistics, with, our second shipment of product and being able to, bring that in. And so I just, it's always to me so important to, as you meet people, be curious, be mindful of their time. But, if they give that time to you, express the gratitude.
Another thing I was thinking about is, it's a really challenging time to kind of break through all the noise and reach consumers and get your name out there. Is there anything kind of that you've seen that's worked creatively? And to that point, how did you come up with the name Jbrds? Where did that come from?
Well, it was kind of a working title. And as you can imagine, a lot of people were like, don't do it because of Allbirds. And we have, mad respect for what Allbirds has done and what they're, doing. But what really differentiates us is, our stake in the ground is not sustainability. Our stake in the ground, by starting them off on the right foot, is to remain focused at cradle to 8 years old. And so the name really affectionately started because Dr. J, and obviously, we couldn't just call him Dr. J's. And then Birds because of his 30 seasons with the Orioles, and then also our partner Hollabird and Hollabird Sports. And then the designer was sort of messing around with, as if a kid tried to phonetically spell it. So it became Jbrds, abbreviated and dotted the lowercase r. And it just became so playful, and people were like, don't change it. And then, amongst our business partners, we have another investor with the name Jay, and his nickname was Jbird. And so it's one of those things like we're to be sort of a challenger brand in a space with all that noise is, not being afraid of like somebody saying, oh, well, do you think you're going to encroach on this or that, really play up who you are. And so for us, we're Baltimore based. We joke that we want to be Baltimore's fourth bird. So if you've got the Orioles, the Ravens, the Blue Jays there at Johns Hopkins, then Jaybird is the fourth bird.
Well, of all the seasons to align yourself with the O's, this is one of them. They are back with a vengeance. And I will say, just behind the curtain for our listeners, there's an ambulance going by. Thomas mutes his mic, and you still hear it through Mike's because they're neighbors, right? Because the ambulance is going by their mutual
living on Capitol Hill.
Yeah, living on Capitol Hill for sure. I have one last question, and then Thomas, you can let me know if you have one last question. What's like the future, Mike? What are you looking for in 24? You talked about the closing the seed round and the investments that have come in, the $750,000. That's all very exciting. What are you going to do with that? Now I feel like Mark Cuban. What are you going to do with the money?
Now we're on Shark Tank. This has changed from from Shoe In to Shark Tank.
Yeah, sorry about that.
I was telling an investor the other day I won't be able to run for office, for having created jobs. So we're quite nimble. Like we've looked at it from concept to delivered good. Like most of that money is going into marketing and new product development. But our tagline is start them off on the right foot. Our vision is to really become an active lifestyle brand. So although it's anatomically correct footwear that is ranged based on developmental milestones and it is meant to be cute, we're also going to look at athletic. So if we're helping kids walk and run is core to play, and run should be fun, we think there is a mommy and me opportunity when baby gets fit for their first pair of shoes and they're required in daycare from 6 months to 9 months. It's also an optimal time for mom to get a new pair of running shoes. So we're going to activate at the running event this year, and we're actually going to open up wholesale moving forward. We have an advisor joining us, Rob Faw, who had been intimately involved in helping scale Sekai Run and On Running. To help us develop that wholesale strategy. But to kind of wrap up the answer to your question, Matt, is really to evolve into starting kids off running on the right foot, start school off on the right foot, start sports in general off on the right foot. So it's a pretty ambitious vision, but I unfortunately have to blame your economist who validated the unit economics of what we have here. So some might think our total addressable market is small from cradle to 8 years old. But if on average kids are buying 6 to 8 pairs of shoes, or parents are buying 6 to 8 pairs of shoes for their kid, we see that there's a really big opportunity for us to do running and cleated and other things.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Total sense.
Yeah. So I guess to close us out, Mike, do you have any final thoughts or advice to or maybe another small company that's starting out, or anyone that's kind of doing what you did before, working for one of the big companies?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the expression, don't be afraid to fail. And obviously you got to have, a partnership. I have an amazing partner, as Thomas knows, and my wife, Kareth, and she's a commercial director and filmmaker, and she comes with a branded lens, having worked for Oprah and Viacom and other places. But in that not being afraid to fail, ideas become things. And so, as you concept what it is you're looking to create, it needs to become something tangible. So for us, that concept became a prototype. That prototype became inventory. Inventory became sales. And so I think it's just, you can talk about a lot of these things. You can make decks. You can pitch a lot of people, but until you can actually show them that you can actually either sell this thing or make this thing, they're not going to come along for the adventure.
Yeah. So well said, Mike. So well said. Yeah. Beside every, relatively great, good dude like the three of us, there's an amazing woman for sure. And I can speak for all three of us when I say that. So Mike, thank you for joining us. What's the URL? If people want to check out the product, where should they go?
They should go to jbrds.com, jbrds.com, jbrds.com.
Got it. That's awesome. Well, folks, this has been another exciting edition of Shoe and Show. We're so glad that you're listening, and you keep listening, and our audience continues to grow even after many years. Check us out, shoeandshow.com, for all the episodes, and make sure you subscribe and like and give us only 5-star ratings. The system only accepts those for some weird AI reason. I just blame AI like we're doing for everything now. But be that as it may, we hope that you enjoyed this episode, and we will see you next time. Shoe and Show is out.
Shoe In has been brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear. For information about FDRA, visit fdra.org.